So could you please tell me a little about yourself and what you do?
Well, I'm Kerry Emanuel. I'm a professor of atmospheric science at MIT. I work a lot on the meteorology of the Earth's tropics and the climate of the Earth. And I specialize in tropical cyclones, aka hurricanes.
Wow, very interesting. What are some of the most favorable and least favorable conditions for hurricanes to form?
Well, hurricanes form over tropical oceans that are sufficiently warm in environments which are very humid and in which the background winds, the trade winds, aren't changing very much with altitude.
Wow, so it would be an often occurrence for them to form.
Well, in fact, the conditions for hurricanes are right over a large portion of the tropics much of the year, but hurricanes don't form spontaneously. They need to have a trigger, some kind of external disturbance to come along to get them started. Other than that, they will go.
Is the Texas coast more susceptible to hurricanes than other parts of the Gulf Coast?
Not really. I would say that the susceptibility is pretty uniform from, say, Louisiana down to the Rio Grande.
Now, are hurricanes in the Gulf Coast of Mexico different than hurricanes that occur in the North Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean?
It's really the same storm.
That's an easy question to answer.
There's one thing is that because the Gulf gets deeper only very gradually as you go offshore, that shallow water conduces to much bigger storm surges. So hurricanes making landfall in Texas are much more likely to produce a big surge than, say, on the east coast of Florida.
Now, what kind of equipment do you use, or do scientists use, to predict hurricanes?
Well, hurricane prediction is based today mostly on computer models that solve the equations, the rather complex equations that govern the evolution of the atmosphere, water within it, fluxes of heat from the ocean, and so forth. And they've gotten very good, actually, at predicting the tracks of hurricanes, but not so good at predicting how strong they'll be.
So you've got one, but you don't have the other, so it's kind of
We are working hard on the other, but it's not there yet.
Now, what is El Nino?
El Nino is an interesting climate fluctuation that affects most of the tropical Pacific, and its most prominent manifestation is a dramatic warming of the equatorial eastern and central part of the Pacific Oceans, which are usually cold, and a cooling of the far western equatorial Pacific. And it's accompanied by dramatic changes in the distribution of rainfall in the tropics. And it occurs, it's not periodic, but it occurs roughly every 3 or 4 years.
Now, 2013, is it going to be an El Nino year?
It's too early to say. In fact, it's a little hard to make that prediction much before April.
So you really need to be into it to know.
Yeah, maybe someday we'll be able to predict them more further ahead of time, but today.
Now, what role does El Nino, how does it increase our risk for hurricanes?
It actually reduces it.
So
in an El Nino year, you're less likely to have hurricanes. I'm not sure that's absolutely true in Texas, but it's true through the Atlantic. And there are two reasons for it. It makes the atmosphere over the Atlantic slightly warmer, which reduces the contrast between the temperature of the atmosphere and the temperature of the ocean. It's that contrast, ultimately, that drives hurricanes. The other thing is it tends to produce stronger winds over the tropical Atlantic. And as we discussed before, when you have a lot of wind shear, that's not conducive to hurricanes.
Now, La Nina, does it increase the
La
risk
Nina.
for hurricanes?
La Nina is the opposite phase of El Nino.
So it's like the danger.
The dangerous years are La Nina years. But you can have big hurricanes in El Nino years. It's a signal, but it's not completely decisive.
Wow. Now, what is the worst Texas Gulf hurricane on record, like ever the worst?
Well, it was the Galveston hurricane in 1900, which was also the worst natural catastrophe in the whole of the U.S. in terms of loss of life to this day. And it killed something more than about 8,000 people. There was almost no warning, and what killed people, as is often the case, is the storm surge, which is a tsunami-like phenomenon that accompanies the storm.
Well, you just answered my second question as well. What was the worst hurricane in the United States?
Same
wow.
One,
so we've got all of the
bad ones. You got the bad tornadoes and the bad hurricanes.
Yeah. Wow. Ouch.
But no volcanoes.
Yes, thank God. Thank God, we don't need volcanoes. That's the last thing we need. Now, what are the best ways to protect yourself and your home from hurricanes?
Well, there's a long-term strategy and there's a short-term strategy. And the long-term strategy is you want to make sure your house is built well, that the roof is tied down to the walls, and that it's well insured.
Yes.
In the short term, if a hurricane is coming, you know it's coming, boarding up the windows is a good idea, and leaving is a very good idea.
Yes. So true. Getting out of there is the most important.
Especially if the authorities tell you to leave, don't mess with that.
Yes.
Leave,
yes.
Yeah.
Now, it's recently we had that superstorm Sandy.
Right.
What is a superstorm?
It's nothing meteorologically. We don't have, that's a term that was invented by the media. We don't recognize that term. But
so is it just a hurricane?
It wasn't just a hurricane. It was what we call a hybrid event. So,
hybrid storm.
Hurricanes are called tropical cyclones, whereas winter storms, the low pressure systems that you see on the everyday weather map, are called extratropical storms. Hurricanes are powered by evaporation of seawater, and winter storms are powered by the horizontal temperature contrast in the atmosphere. And hybrid storms actually get some energy from both sources.
Yes. So they'd be sort of a stronger, like a more powerful storm.
They tend not to be as strong as hurricanes, but they tend to be much larger in size. And that's very important in building up large storm surges, which is the real killer.
So like a huge chaos sort of thing.
Just a very broad storm.
Very scary.
Yeah, very scary.
So it could hit many places at once, which causes a lot of chaos.
And builds up very strong surges. You know, a much smaller hurricane wouldn't have produced a 14-foot surge in Manhattan.
So what you're saying is that these surges are the big things, the really damaging.
Often they are, and inland flooding from just terrific rainfalls are another big killer in hurricanes. It's not as recognized as it should be.
See, it's scary. I can just imagine the hurricanes. Sometimes there's hail, but it's raining, it's storming, there's these huge waves coming over. I mean, back in time when people didn't always understand what it was, I mean, my gosh, that'd be so frightening.
Yeah.
Like earthquakes and volcano eruptions.
Oh, I know, they were terrified. Back in the old days, they were very terrified.
Very scary.
We should be more terrified ourselves.
Now, what are some of the topics that your fellow scientists have been talking about at this Texas Weather Conference?
Everything under the sun, because this is the annual meeting of the whole American Meteorological Society.
Wow.
So there are lots of talks about climate, weather, everything.
Wow. Very
Everything's wrapped up in one.
Covering everything. You're getting a lot of...
Yeah, it's hard to know which talks to go to. It's very confusing.
Do you have a favorite subject?
Well, I like to go to the talks on climate and on the tropics, mostly.
Wow, well, you are just amazing. You go through my questions, boom, 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 and you answer them. So thank you so much for this
You're quite
interview.
welcome. Very nice to meet you.
It was a pleasure to meet you, and I'm so looking forward to your talk. It's going to be a blast.
Well, I hope we'll have some fun with that.
I'm sure. Just from talking with you, you're going to be an amazing speaker. So I'm really looking forward to it.